Hello, my treasures. It's time for the final day of the return of Naxxramas card reviews. And today we got the cards for Druid, Rogue, Shaman, and Warlock, including some cards that will make you question what Blizzard plans with the next card rotation, and some last chance cards for some decks that are going to be rotating out. Speaking of one of those, the first card we're going to go over is Right, which is a 1-cost Druid spell that gives your hero +2 attack this turn, deal damage equal to your hero's attack to a minion. This is really good as a spot removal for something like Questline Druid, which is a deck that hasn't really seen too much play. This could act as a way to actually remove any big taunt your opponent might have in between their face and your own hero, which might make that deck way more consistent than it actually ever should be, because it can get up to 32 plus damage in a single turn without too much of a effort trying to get there. Also starting the loop on the next turn again, so 2 copies of this could just finish off almost any opponent in the game. Now for the next card, Life from Death, which is a 6-cost nature spell. Draw 3 cards, infuse 6. This costs 1. So this is basically grave digging, except it normally costs more than the priest card. This card has a little bit of a harder condition to actually fulfill. However, if you are using this in an aggro druid deck, then this could act as a way to refill your hand after your opponent AoE nukes your entire board, which could make a card like this incredibly playable. However, with a infuse of 6, I very much doubt it's going to see too much play in any type of druid decks. There are just a lot more better draw power cards that you could be running in those style of decks than a card like this that would normally cost 6. And as a top deck, this would feel incredibly bad to actually get. The main problem with this card is it serves a similar purpose to Nourish, but Nourish is a lot more flexible in a lot more druid decks than a card like this, and I'd much rather run Nourish than Life from Death, unless Nourish actually rotates out with a new rotation. Now for the next card, which is the card that will make you question what Blizzard is thinking. Death Beetle, which is a 6-cost, 6 attack, 6 HP undead beast. Taunt. Manathirst 11. Gain +4/+4. Charge. What the hell is Blizzard trying to do with this card? This card only functions if you have Wildheart Guff in rotation, but Wildheart Guff is going to rotate out in 2 months, so what are they going to do with this card? There are 3 possibilities. A, Guff goes into the core set, which would make so many people angry. B, this card is completely dead and they just let it stay dead while in rotation. 3, they nerf this card or buff it, depending how you view it, to have a lower mana thirst, but they also decrease its stat line to make it a little bit more fair to play against. Or I guess 4th, they introduce another Wildheart Guff that isn't Guff himself, but something that acts very similar. Now, Guff has had an interesting history throughout his stay in standard Hearthstone. Can you believe he used to give you unempty mana crystals that you could just use on the same turn that you actually got them? Because that was sure insane, and I don't understand why Blizzard thought that was a good idea. I remember a lot of people, when he was first revealed, thought he wasn't even going to be that strong of a card because there wasn't much other ramp and there was no big payoff. However, we kept seeing bigger and bigger Battlecry minions that could easily be abusable in Druid and no other class, and thus cards like Guff became really playable. This is just another minion in the long chain of minions that fall under that category, and without Guff, I don't think this card is playable at all. However, when you do have Guff in rotation along with him, you could, in theory, use this card in combination with Battleground Battlemaster in order to do 20 plus damage with 2 copies of this. There's other ways to buff this up to be 40 plus damage. However, I do think, as it currently stands, this card, while it is technically playable with Guff, you probably aren't going to want to use this card over some of the other type of win conditions that you could use in Druid right now. There's just a lot of different possibilities that you could use in Druid, and this one just feels a little bit flat compared to everything else. Now for the next card revealed, which is Ransack, which is a 0-cost rogue spell that deals 1 damage to a minion. If you played a card from another class, deal 4 damage instead. Have we learned nothing about the fact that giving Rogue 0 mana spells is a real big problem, especially with cards like Edwin currently still in rotation, or even the location card for Rogue, even though that has actually been nerfed, and Edwin is going to be rotating out soon. I can't see a world where this isn't playable in a Thief Rogue package, because it is a 0-cost card, and you can easily combo it out with some of the other cards mentioned before, or things like Gadgets and Auctioneer, where you would want a lot of really cheap minions in order to just draw through your entire deck, which may or may not give Garroot Rogue one last chance before it actually rotates out, which could be fun, but I fear this is just going to be used in some of the other more meta relevant rogue decks. Now for the next card, which is Stitch Creation, which is a 3-cost 1 attack 1 HP undead minion combo. Gain +2/+2. Infuse 2. Gain +3/+3. Manathirst 8. Gain +4/+4. I'm actually kind of curious of how this card is actually going to work. Now, is it going to get the stat bonuses for each individual part of its effect, which means this is going to be a 3-mana 10/10, which is absolutely insane? Or is it just going to get the additional benefits on each individual step, depending on which one is the actual highest? I'm assuming it's probably going to be a 3-mana 10/10, which is going to be annoying to actually deal with. However, Rogue doesn't really try to go for late game, and having Manathirst 8 might not make this card playable. I'm interested to see if a undead rogue deck pops up again with some of the other Death Rattle synergy that we've had in rotation, even though that deck did get a little bit nerfed. This card doesn't clog up your Death Rattle pool, but it does give you another really powerful undead minion that Rogue can easily use. I think this is somewhere in between really playable and just alright enough to see some play if a deck like that does come into fruition. Now for the last rogue card, which is going to be Jolly Roger, a 1-cost 1 attack 3 HP undead pirate. After your hero attacks, summons a 1/1 undead pirate. This is perfect for Weapon Rogue and Pirate Rogue. Out of all the decks that they could have supported, that's a really interesting one to try to support. I know Weapon Rogue support is mainly rotating out once the new rotation actually happens, so you're going to have a 2-month window where you can actually use Weapon Pirate Rogue, which could be a little bit interesting. It's a deck that I've tried out in the past, and this does make things like Captain Hooktusk a lot more easy to actually pull off, to steal cards from your opponent's hand or on their board or even from their deck, thus allowing that deck to be maybe a little bit more powerful than it currently is, even though it doesn't see too much play. Out of all 3 of the rogue cards, I think this one is the most fun out of them all, mainly due to the fact that it does enable a deck that hasn't really had any time in the spotlight at all for quite a long time, and could be one last hurrah before a lot of the cards actually rotate out. I actually can't wait to try out a undead pirate rogue synergy deck, because that does seem like a very powerful idea. Battlecry off multiple times. Now for the next card, which is Blazing Transmutation, which is a 1-cost fire spell. Choose a minion, discover one that costs 1 more to transform into it. The cool thing about this card is it introduces a fire spell for Evolve Shaman, thus allowing you to have another school magic for Evolve Shaman, and thus being able to more likely use multicaster in the deck, while also giving you a little bit of additional draw power. It also does give you a lot more flexibility of what you're going to evolve something into, and it is going to make it a lot more annoying, especially because the 10 pool still is small enough where you can consistently get some of the really powerful 10 drops off of a card like this. Especially given that we also do have Thaddius in rotation right now. With a card like this, it's going to be really frustrating to get your opponent to play this down on a 3-drop null and then always get Thaddius on the following turn. Now, Thaddius isn't probably even the best choice that you can get all the time. Local R is going to be way better in a lot of matchups, or any other card that has a really powerful Death Rattle or other type of Wind Fury. There's just a lot of really powerful cards in the 10-drop pool that a card like this existing while Null is in rotation is going to make for a very frustrating gameplay. Now for the next card, which is Cold Storage, a 1-cost frost spell that freezes a minion. Add a copy of it to your hand. So this can be a way to steal your opponent's win conditions if they have a really powerful battlecry on their board and you somehow actually survive. So getting something like Astalor, being able to duplicate his battlecries through some of the other battlecry synergy that Shaman actually has would be incredibly frustrating to play against. Most of the time, this won't act as removal because there aren't any cards that destroy a frozen minion in Shaman in current rotation, if I can remember right. However, I do think this will be very powerful, as it'll allow you to stall out whatever key minion your opponent might have, or any big minion they might actually have, while also giving yourself a copy of it that could turn the game around. I don't know exactly what deck this is going to actually fit in, especially given the fact that Free Shaman is going to be rotating out pretty quickly here, and I don't think this really helps that deck too much. If we still had Snowfall Guardian where it used to be, then this card would be incredibly powerful because you could use it as additional copies of that. But outside of that, I don't know, again, where this is going to fit. Now for the last Shaman card, which is Frostfin Chomper, a 3-cost 2-attack Elemental Murloc with 3 HP. Battlecry, if you've played an Elemental last turn, summon 3/1/1 Murloc. So are we going to see a Murloc Shaman? I really kind of doubt it, mainly due to the fact that both of the synergies don't really work too well with each other. Sure, you could have some type of swarming elemental Murloc deck, as Swarm Shaman is actually a deck right now. However, I don't know if there's enough really early game Shaman minions to want to run a card like this in a Murloc deck, mainly because most of those early minions also have some type of benefit whenever you do play another elemental, which means you have to run both a critical mass of elementals and a critical mass of Murlocs, thus making you run out of space, especially with Prince Renethal actually nerfed. I could see this maybe being played because it is 4 bodies for the price of 1 card, but to be honest, this card just seems to make Murloc Shaman a little less consistent if you are going to try to run some elemental synergy. Now for the Warlock cards. The first one is Nothing Impossible, a 2-cost spell that gives all friendly demons and Murlocs Death Rattle. Summon a 2/2 Imp Hawk. So this is a 2-mana Soul of the Forest, which is going to be incredibly annoying to deal with. This also does make a interesting case for a Murloc Imp deck, because most of the Imps can be randomly generated off of spells, and then you could also use a very few small number of Imp synergy cards in order to have additional draw powers, such as Impending Catastrophe, which might be an interesting deck to actually try out, but I do think this is going to serve a very similar problem to the previous card that we just went over, where it might make a Murloc deck or a Imp Warlock deck a little bit less consistent, and thus you wouldn't want to run a card like this. However, this, unlike that previous card, does make it where your boards are a lot more sticky, and thus you're going to have a lot easier time to just kill your opponent on the following up turn, which may or may not make this a lot more playable. If Warlock decides to cut out the Curse package and put in a Murloc package instead, it might be a really interesting deck to play around with, but I think most people will probably stick to the Curse package. Now for the next card that made me frustrated when I saw the color of the art, Plague Eruption, which is a 3-cost spell that deals 2 damage to all minions. If you discarded a card this game, deal 1 more. So, because it's green, I thought it would be a fail spell, but it turns out, no, it's just Hugin the Unclean, I think, with the Safety Dance, which is a really fun little Naxxramas reference from World of Warcraft. However, because this does not have the Fel tag, even though it is green, and the Plague is technically green for some weird reason, even though it is Death Magic instead of Fel Magic, I don't know how strong this card is actually going to be. Discard Warlock isn't really a deck that you're going to want to run right now anyways, and this card doesn't really provide anything that that deck was really missing. The deck's missing a really good win condition, and it's going to continue to miss a really good win condition, very similar to Fel Warlock that never saw any additional support after its initial set. I don't understand why they never printed at least one more Fel spell to give that deck a little bit more oomph or even some more synergy for Fel, but it is what it is. And honestly, I think this card probably also won't see much play just because there's just much better AoE board clears in Warlock that you could easily use for even less mana. Now for the last card of the set, Suspicious Peddler, who is a reference to the Dark Peddler from, I don't actually remember what set that was, but this is a 2-drop, 2-attack, 3 HP undead minion. Battlecry, discover a 1-cost card. If your opponent guesses your choice, they gain a cost. So I don't actually think this card is going to see much play at all. The only difference between this and the previous version is the fact that this has a downside and 1 additional HP. In order for this card to be a lot more playable, you'd have to increase its stat line to something like 3/4 for 2 mana, just because of the fact that it does have a downside. However, that would probably be a little bit more oppressive to how Hearthstone currently is, and would be just an insane aggro tool that almost every single Warlock deck would actually run. I honestly don't know how you fix this card without making it really powerful. Maybe you drop it to a 1 mana, but I guess they didn't want to lose the reference of the original card, and that's why they only gave it an increase in 1 HP. It sucks to say this is just a very disappointing card, even though it is a really fun reference. Alright, so those were all the cards for the return of Naxxramas mini set. So let me know down below what decks you're most looking forward to actually using. I think a Menagerie Paladin deck is up there for me, but something using the 4 Horsemen or Thaddius is probably going to come out first. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.